Hey, this is Nicholas with the Backyard TARDIS here with another Random Thoughts podcast. This time we're going to talk about MCU Phase 4 so far. So I've been kind of waiting until we got a chunk of this before I talked about any of this. I did talk about What If, and I will touch on that briefly here. Part of the big reason why it took me so long to do this is because I just took forever to watch Eternals. But I have now, and so I want to do this. I thought about waiting till Moon Knight, but I think this is a good point to break off. So, first off, my first movie I'm going to discuss in this is actually, I guess, not considered Phase 4. I thought Spider-Man Far From Home, I thought everything post-Endgame was Phase 4, but apparently that is wrapping up Phase 3. So, which in my mind then shouldn't Black Widow also be Phase 3? I don't know. So, Spider-Man Far From Home. Here's a movie that when it came out, I didn't go see it in the theater. The first Spider-Man movie and the only Spider-Man movie I have not gone and seen in the theater. And the reason for that is that I was afraid because I don't usually go see movies the opening weekend. I go see a few after, and I saw everybody just dogging on this movie. Well, I finally watched it, and I liked it. So, if I had to say what the controversy is that when this MCU Spider-Man first came out, everyone was saying, we don't need to see Uncle Ben die again. We don't need to see the origin story of him getting bit by the spider. We don't need to. Just like everybody says with Batman. Hey, we've seen Batman's origin so many times. We don't need to see the pearls fall and the Waynes get shot in the alley. That's been done to death. We all know the story by now. Well, that was the feeling at the beginning. But then as the MCU progressed, they took this stance that since we didn't do that moment, we're not going to mention it. And it didn't get mentioned till What If, which is in an alternate reality to boot. But that's really angered a lot of fans, is that he's having that kind of moment with Iron Man's death. And that's kind of like the catalyst for spurring him on. Now, one thing that I find, especially now that they're getting into the multiverse stuff, I'm okay with everything not being 100% canon, as long as they stick to the core of the character, if that makes sense. I have a problem with Batman ever picking up a gun. That is just so pivotal to the character. Just like I'd have a problem if a Spider-Man went around intentionally killing people. Like, that's not Spider-Man. You can have somebody die in his movie, but he can't intentionally be killing people. You know, that's... you can dance around it, and they do, we'll get to that. But, so for me, the Uncle Ben thing being something in his past, something he's already developed, is good. Now, one thing that I really wish we could get, which they won't do because this would be going back, this would be kind of like Black Widow, but now that we're in the age of all these MCU TV shows, I would have liked, prior to Spider-Man coming in the MCU, an MCU Spider-Man TV show where it's not Spider-Man against the big villains, it's Spider-Man against the common thugs, and he's in that get-up we saw him when Iron Man first, revealed that he knew who he was. If we'd had like a limited series of like Peter Parker being the friendly neighborhood unknown Spider-Man in his little made-up costume, and then you could have the Uncle Ben, and you could have all that, I think that would have been a cool way to establish all that and then have him in the movies, but that's not been done. That's in the past. It's kind of a little late to go back and do that now. I don't think people would be it's not what people would want now. But that was just kind of a thought that I had, that like, I really wish they had done that. And with Spider-Man Far From Home, I think this is a great movie. And I think the stuff with Iron Man, I mean, Tony Stark died in his arms. Like, it's, and then he gives him, his empire and stuff. The emotional weight is there. It's earned. It's built. And I don't think that even if he had the grief of Uncle Ben and dealing with that this wouldn't be a new grief that he'd have to deal with. That didn't really bother me. Would it have been nice for him to say a line like, first Uncle Ben, then Tony Stark? Yes. Or first my parents. He doesn't know what happened to his parents. Remember, he's an orphan being raised by his aunt and uncle. And then his uncle dies, So, yes, it would be nice, but is it movie breaking for me? No. And outside of that, this is a great movie. Mysterio is, what I'm loving about this is we have the Vulture, and then we have Mysterio. We're getting more of Spider-Man's rogue gallery. When we're in a thing where we're constantly getting the Joker, the Penguin, these reoccurrings, and what do we have with Spider-Man? Well, it's got to be Venom and Dr. Octopus and, well, he's only been done once until now, but Venom and the Goblin, and they're going back there, and everyone's like, well, when are we going to get MCU Goblin? It's like, do we really have to keep doing the same character over and over when you've, next to Batman, Spider-Man has the biggest recognizable rogues gallery. We haven't had Scorpion in a movie. We have, Kraven the Hunter is supposedly getting a Sony movie. Morpheus is getting a Sony. There are so many great, the Chameleon, there's so many great Spider-Man villains, the Kingpin. There's just so much they could tackle, so much they could do, and we're dealing with just a small fraction of the most recognizable. And I think it would be really cool if we expanded out from that, got to see more of Spider-Man's rogue gallery. And so seeing Mysterio was just amazing. Just amazing. And having him be connected, he was the Hollywood stunt, but having him connected to Stark, and then hey, he did all these illusion things, but he was working for Stark, and then he got put out of the job by Stark, and he blames him, and that's kind of the whole thing. Having it be the first hint at a multiverse, but not being real, it was such a good thing. And then you see him and MJ's relationship growing bigger, and once again, people are upset about the whole MJ race swap. But once again, this is an alternate reality from the comics, and this is not Mary Jane Watson. This is not the redhead character from the comics. And Spider-Man has had multiple girlfriends over the years. So, while yes, it is a girlfriend who is called MJ, it is not the same one. So it doesn't bother me. Usually when race swapping bothers me is when it's somebody who is, if they said, hey, I don't mind Miles Morales. I like Miles Morales a lot. But if they were to call him Peter Parker, then I'd be like, oh, whoa, no, we're not going to have a black actor play Peter Parker. But the character of Miles Morales, I'm all for it. So once again, they leave enough wiggle room in there with Mary Jane, with MJ, not Mary Jane, but MJ, that I'm cool with it. So this was a fun movie, and I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't go see it in theaters, because it turns out I really enjoyed it, and I wished I saw it on the big screen. Next one, WandaVision. I absolutely love WandaVision. WandaVision is amazing. Amazing. I am a huge fan of sitcoms. I love sitcoms, especially classic sitcoms. I actually don't like most of the sitcoms that are on TV right now. And of the last 10 years. I've fallen out of love with sitcoms. They are a lot more crass, a lot more about sex and drama, and really they feel more like soap operas than they do sitcoms. And I specifically like the sitcoms. Like, I grew up on TGIF, Boy Meets World, Family Matters, Full House, all that kind of stuff. Love that. I've loved, like, the ones that I've loved recently. I liked when they brought Fuller House. I like Girl Meets World. I sort of enjoyed the Roseanne reboot. It wasn't as good as those to me, but it was enjoyable. But harkening back to that, like, I would love a Home Improvement reboot, and there have been a few that have caught my eye and I've just not picked up that I think might have been good, but some of these newer ones they're just not what those old shows were. They're almost more about who's sleeping with who and who's dating. And and there's a place for that. Like, I enjoy, like, Friends and Seinfeld and stuff like that, and I get that the popularity of those shows have kind of been what morphed this. They're trying to be those but more edgy. But I really like the wholesome family sitcom, the Partridge Family, the Brady Bunch, the Honeymooners, Dick Van Dyke Show, I Love Lucy, the Lucy Show. These are the Andy Griffith Show. Like, these are the type of shows that I watch. As a kid, TV Land, you see stuff like I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched and all that, and they did that, and they brought Dick Van Dyke on to help coordinate the show. So the first couple of episodes, the first two dropped, and there are a lot of people who watched that and either were all in on that and were then upset when it went away from that, or watched those and was like, I'm out. And then either heard after episode 3 and came back in, or just never came back in. I was a person who, I love superhero movies and I love family sitcoms. So I was super in. Like, when they were doing the practical effects, like the Bewitched when she's cooking and all the stuff's on string, like, I was totally down for that. The comical, almost I Love Lucy shenanigans of when he gets drunk from the piece of gum. The kind of the Honeymooners, Dick Van Dyke Show kind of a comedy of, where's the boss is coming, what's this date, like, oh no, like, type stuff. I loved it. I loved all the references, and I love how they tied that in to why she's doing this. Is like, she was a refugee, and their family, the one thing that they could do to help these kids get through it is they would steal away these DVDs or VHS or whatever it was of these classic sitcoms. And they would sit down there and they would dream about the American dream and going and having this perfect sitcom life. And as a kid, that was what she was escaping into. And so we see she's having the mental breakdown and she's creating this world. But there are other influences happening, making this happen. The grief, the stuff they do with Vision, it's emotional. It's emotional. The Munsters, when they do It Was Agatha All Along, do 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 do. I was singing that for weeks. Agatha Christie. There's taking a character that is so minor in the Marvel comics. It is a powerful but like plays such a minor role, nowhere front and center. But to see how well that was done, I see a lot of people complain about the ending, that it was like, oh, it was so good, it was so thought and thinking, and then it all ended in a big CGI blah 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 blah. Why are you watching superhero movies? Like, what Avengers movie doesn't end with a blah blah blah? Like, all the movies that people talk about, oh, this movie is so amazing. Like, this is good MCU movie. But I don't like MCU movies are cookie cutter. But oh man, Infinity War. Now that was an accomplishment. Or Iron Man or something. Like, guess what? The end of Iron Man, big CG fight. End of Avengers, big CG fight. End of Infinity War, the snap, that's a bunch of big CG stuff. That is what superhero shows, movies, that the fact that this was able to turn that on its edge, and it wasn't until episode 3 that we had like that boom, that moment where we saw what was really going on. I think it was great. And here's the interesting thing is that supposedly there were scenes where Agatha Christie morphed her cat or whatever, and Monica Rambeau fought that character. And they thought, that's too much. I would have liked to have seen that. I would have liked to have seen another battle going on. But they said, no, we need to focus more. They showed that restraint. And so for people saying like, it didn't show restraint, it was just all flash, no substance. And you've got the Visions talking philosophy as they're battling. It's great. It's unique. It's different. I love this. Next one. This one's lower on my list as far as like what I like and what I didn't like. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now this was a very troubled production. And because it was completely filmed before the pandemic, and then everything shut down and they had to reshoot it. Why? Because supposedly the main plot of this movie was that the blip, everybody coming back, there was this huge virus outbreak thing, and the medicine was scarce, and governments were not being liberal with it. They were not trusting, and so the message was, in a pandemic, governments are bad, and Captain America, Falcon, has to step up and tell the world to do better, and that because there's these terrorists who are fighting to get vaccines for. You could see why not just a pandemic movie, but a pandemic movie where it says don't trust the government would be something Disney would not want to release during a pandemic. So they took that whole storyline out of it. So now the storyline doesn't quite fit. It doesn't quite make sense. And the do better speech doesn't quite hit the same way. And we're talking now about immigration, which is yet another political hot topic that Disney feels safer talking about it because they feel like they're on the good side of that message. It's complicated issues. It's political. The stuff with I should have wrote this down beforehand because my mind's drawing blank. But they go to the black Captain America that was like from the Cold War era, Isaiah Bradley, and came to me this time. Usually it doesn't. I usually get done with this and I'm like, shout the name out after I hit stop on the record button. But Isaiah Bradley, he's a cool character in the comics. It talks about real world things that were happening during that period of government testing on black soldiers and that kind of stuff. Things that the U.S. government, after a certain amount of time, basically all the people from that time period died off or were too old for people to be willing to punish. They released the information of what was done. And it's horrific and it's horrible that was thought of as okay at that time. And so I don't think that's too heavy-handed. A lot of people had a problem with Falcon going to the bank and having an issue. Everyone said this is, he's the poor black man who can't get a loan. Boo-hoo, he's a superhero, he's this, that. I don't think he's broke. I think he's getting money from the government. But he lives an expensive lifestyle doing all the stuff he does, saving the world. And I don't think he's, they're not paying him lavishly. I also look at it as like, Avenger money. Well, we found out like all that money went to Spider-Man. So he'd have to go to Spider-Man for that loan. Because Stark's money didn't go to the Avengers. It went to Spider-Man. Now, is it true that he could get on TV and do a bunch of things and probably resume? Yes, but you also have to keep in mind that you're applying today's world's things to this. This is after half the people have been blipped away and now they're back. Money, the economy would be in such turmoil. Banks' policies would be like, the fact that the banks are even standing is an amazing thing. As somebody who's a business owner who needed to repay a personal loan that had been given to me to help out a family member who had loaned me money, and I had purchased a company that had been in business for over 30 years. I've been working as owner for 2 years, and I went to the bank that this company had opened up with day one and had been using, and they said, "We're sorry, we can't help you." And it was like, why? Well, because you don't have, you're self-employed and you haven't had enough tax returns. You're considered unemployed, and your wife's credit is not sufficient. You don't even apply for the loan that you have in your house. I had tons of equity in my house. They couldn't. I had worked for this banker. I had done the personal work on their house. I work for the bank. I do the locks on the bank. But apparently I am untrustworthy for the loan, yet I'm trustworthy enough to do their security. Why? Because they're sitting there at a computer, and if they can't push the buttons, they can't push the buttons. The only way people can get around that is if they go and they do the notoriety thing and they cause a stink. But that person at the bank that you're talking to, yeah, they're going to stonewall you because they can't do anything else. That's just how that works. Now, yes, he's a superhero. He's this, he's that. 100% there would have been channels that, like, eventually he could have gone through and done. But he's distracted by all this bad stuff going on in the world. I would assume, had there been no supervillains, he would have been able to have come up with doing a video or something. But once again, this is in the post-blip world. So while I do think, like, the situation where they get pulled over by the cops because they're just two people yelling in a neighborhood, I'm sorry, that was super unrealistic. Super unrealistic. But all that said and done, the storyline was choppy. It was not well put together. There were cool things in it. There are a ton of cool episodes in it. I will definitely go back and rewatch some of these episodes. Now compare that to the next show I'm talking about, which is Loki. Loki is a show that I was all about when it was on. I thought this was the next WandaVision. I love time travel. The TVA, like the concepts they had of, like, zapping away a variant and, putting a thing that resets the timeline. Those mechanics made it possible to do whatever you want in time travel. If you have a button that you can, like, put this bomb down and it basically erases all the changes we did. What an amazing mechanic for time travel. It really allows them to cut loose, so to speak. However, I'm going to say that once again, this faltered in a way that, when all was said and done, as much as I liked Kid Loki, I liked Gator Loki, I liked Vote For Me Loki, I liked Lady Loki. I did. I was not one of those people that's like, Lady Loki. And I loved how they were able to take Loki's character, and because they were taking him in an earlier form where he's still, like, pure evil, he hasn't gone through all the growth he's had in the MCU, but then he watches his life, he watches himself die, he watches everything that happens, he watches his world burn, and he has to take all that in at once. And so he doesn't reach the same growth he does in the MCU. He reaches a different growth. It breaks him a little bit, because he's not taking this all in slowly. He's watching, his mother die, his dad die, his planet die, and then him die. And he's like, this is my legacy. This is when he's thinking he's all high and mighty, and it breaks him a little bit. And when he sees it, like they're using Infinity Stones as paperweights, and that does not make Infinity Stones pointless, because this is alternate realities. In the comics, it's well established that the Infinity Stones do not work in other universes. You have to use the Infinity Stones of that universe in that universe. You take them to another universe and they have no power. So TVA is in a place outside of time. So the Infinity Stones, when in the TVA, would have no power, no control over that, because they create the universe and then they exercise their power over the universe that they create. So when you take it to an alternate one, it's incompatible. So it's not like if a TVA agent went to somebody like Thanos with the gauntlet, it's not like they could just stop him, like Thanos couldn't rule them like a boss. But if they're able to get Thanos to the TVA headquarters, all of a sudden his gauntlet would be powerless. So they're still super powerful things. It doesn't take away from Endgame and Infinity War and all that in the previous 22 movies. That said, everything got to the end. We got the whole thing about Kang, and like that blew me open. Like, oh, I can't wait for season 2 of Loki. I can't wait for this. But as time went on, I realized I am never probably going to watch Loki again. I've watched WandaVision multiple times. I just admitted that there are episodes of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I probably won't watch it from beginning to end, but there are episodes that I really enjoyed. Action scenes, different, very cinematic movie. I will watch that again. Loki is just not that. It was a piece of information I needed for the puzzle of what's coming up with the MCU, but in itself, not that great. Now going on to Black Widow. I am famously known, and this will come up shortly with one of the next shows, that I did not like Iron Man 3 because it ruined one of the best comic book villains of all time, and that is the Mandarin. And so when there are other things you can complain about that movie, but that like completely destroyed that movie. It made it my second lowest rated MCU movie ever because of that. So in Black Widow, you have a character, Taskmaster. Now, Taskmaster is a mutant whose mutant ability is to, within a few minutes of watching somebody fight, they're able to make the perfect counter to all their moves. And so even though people can have all these amazing powers, Taskmaster is able to do it. And Taskmaster, well, not to the Deadpool levels, more like the Spider-Man levels, is a mark with a mouth. He not only beats them, he does it effortlessly and mockingly while he does it. And he's able to toe-to-toe with somebody like Spider-Man, who has spider spins. He's even able to fight Deadpool, who, because Deadpool is so unpredictable, is one of the few people able to defeat Taskmaster, but they hold their own. A lot of people are like, well, Taskmaster's not that big. He is a big comic character, and he is a character that I really like. So, my biggest problem with this movie is that the character of Taskmaster wasn't just called a different name. Now, some people have said, hey, yeah, but at the end, things change, the helmet comes off, and maybe in the next movie this will become the Taskmaster we know. But that said, the emotional beat done with it is done really well. This movie is fun action. There is no doubt to me, in the comics, Black Widow, like Red Guardian, has a form of the super soldier serum that the Russians were coming up with. That has never been stated in the MCU, but in this movie, it is definitely apparent, as like Taskmaster's throwing her through concrete pillars and stuff, and she's getting up and doing kung fu after it. Yes, she is superhuman. She is not as strong as Captain America, but she is comparable. And that will come back to play when we talk about Hawkeye. But the Red Guardian is amazing in this. It still fits. Hey, if all the world wasn't being so crazy and Russia wasn't such the way it is, maybe this would be a character to cosplay for guys heavyset like me. I mean, he was just so fun. Does he ever talk about me? Who? The captain. I've always Of course, we were on opposite sides, but mutual respect for men in our, just the constant, like, oh, I loved him. Elena, oh, this movie is so much fun, Now, Red Guardian in the comics is Black Widow's ex-husband. So in here, he's her fake KGB father. A little bit different. But I really, really enjoyed this movie. The Taskmaster stuff, though, it taints it for me. So it doesn't rank high, but I'd probably put this in the middle of my MCU rankings. But it's a fun movie, and it was worth the $30 on Disney+. What If? I already talked about What If in another video. Go watch that. But this pushes the bounds of cartoon. This made a cartoon in the MCU, and seeing that Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, is going to pull upon What If, shows that this is not MCU token. This is MCU proper canon, and really helping to establish the multiverse. So we had WandaVision started the multiverse. We had Loki multiverse, and we have What If establishing the multiverse, and it's going to continue to have that. And it can really kind of gives an idea of where they're going with the MCU. So this is really good. However, I will say the episodes are all over the place. Party Thor, didn't like it. And one of the things that was saddest was it was so cool to see Chadwick Boseman play Black Panther, because this was recorded before his death but came out after his death. So it was kind of very touching for that. It was very upsetting that I didn't like the writing of a lot of his episodes. So it was like this beautiful thing, but then tainted because I don't like what I'm actually seeing. But it's like so special that we're getting to see Chadwick Boseman playing Black Panther, even if it's only as a voice. So now, the big one, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie was amazing. I loved this movie. I really, really love this movie. And first off, let me say, there are a couple of reasons. One, the Mandarin. That's Iron Man's Green Goblin. That's Iron Man's Joker. The fact that we wasted Mandarin versus Iron Man. Like, I wish that they could retrospectively do another Iron Man movie and do this Mandarin versus Tony Stark, have it be a prequel. It'd be amazing. Now, everybody go, oh, well, we already know how it's going to end, Oh, they're both going to live, this, that. Yes. But we know that about every comic book movie. The good guys are going to win at the end. Even when Infinity War, when everybody snapped away, we knew that there was another Spider-Man movie coming, so we knew people were going to be snapped back. This was done so well. Now, they had to change his powers up. Why? Because he is basically the Infinity Gauntlet on a small scale, like on a planetary scale. He can't change the universe, but he can affect a whole planet that way. And it was always, it's been done a couple of different ways. It's been done as magic. It has been done as alien technology. But just kind of the idea that it was more faith-based and Iron Man was more tech-based, and it was something that Iron Man couldn't understand, and the Mandarin didn't understand the tech of it. He just understood it as mystical. And, it's this alien tech, but to him it's mystical. And to him, Iron Man couldn't accept that. So it was like the West versus East, philosophies against each other. And so to see that finally done, to see him done so well, and, it's funny because a lot of people were like, yeah, he's another sympathetic villain. What is it with the Disney and all the sympathetic villains? I will go back, and I think I said this when I was talking about Salty Nerds podcast review of it. The first set of MCU Phase 1 movies, all the villains are carbon copies in Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the villains. We had Zoloff, and we had the first two Iron Man movies are just like evil copies of Iron Man, and then we had the first Ant-Man, and even to an extent at that time Loki, and these were not sympathetic villains. These were just downright evil people who were just evil carbon copies, the Red Skull, evil carbon copies of our heroes. And people were like, what boring villains. Marvel doesn't have good villains like DC. DC has deep and complicated and tortured backstory villains. And Marvel has mustache twirling, haha, I'm evil. So what does MCU do? It responds. It makes tortured backstory, sympathetic villains. And then they start doing that every movie, and now people are like, oh, Disney's got to make all the villains. Now, I get it. They're doing like Cruella de Vil was a good person, and dogs really are the bad guy. Like, yeah, I get it. I get that Disney has an overarching theme. It's the same thing with Star Wars. Everybody's complaining about that in Star Wars, but hey, Star Wars is the first person to do it. Darth Vader was the ultimate bad guy. In Return of the Jedi, he's redeemed. So if you have a problem with that, that's part of the DNA of Star Wars. And I think it worked really good here. Now, why do I identify with Shang-Chi so much? So he's, Asian, living in America, and you look at me, I'm not Asian. However, I grew up in the Thermalito district of Orville, California, and that was a place where they took refugees from Vietnam, ones who helped the U.S. in Vietnam, and brought them to America and gave them a fresh start. When I went to school, most of my classmates were Asian. Of like Hmong, Min, Laotian, Thai, Cambodian. Those were the students that I went to school with. Also in that area, that's where the Continental Railroad went through. We had a huge Chinese population. We had the Bacchae Temple. We had the Bacchae Festival every year. It's a big, huge thing. So there's a large Chinese population here too. And I now own a business in the Yuba City area, which is like outside of India, the next biggest collection of people of the Sikh from India. And so, a huge population that I hear. I have grown up around more Asian culture than I have white culture. Like, that's been the kids I played with, the people I were around, the people I do business with. So, seeing that in a superhero movie, that culture, not just a character, it's not just an Asian character, but the culture around that, like a superhero whose powers are like when you think about like they're constantly working on diversity, why don't we have anybody that's like gets powers from a Mayan temple, or we're so bent on everybody's from like New York, that this really even like black superheroes, they're all like from New York City or from Louisiana or something like that. But where's a black superhero that comes from like South Africa or something, Zimbabwe? And I know that DC has some, but and there are some in the Marvel comics, but like in the MCU proper, we don't get that. We don't even get British people. Like, I want to see all the superheroes that are in England, who are chumming it up with Doctor Who. So Shang-Chi, and I like the old Kung Fu movies, and so it was like that. But the biggest complaint a lot of people had is, it got to the third act, and then it got, big old CG thing. Once again, that's an MCU movie. Like, I want to see that. That's how these movies are supposed to end, is a big CG. Like, would it be cool for the whole first movie to have been just the Kung Fu stuff and that to be the sequel movie? Yes, but it was neat. Now, why did they change the 10 ring part? Because if he just was walking around like Thanos with these 10 rings on his fingers and just like snapping and making things happen, it would lessen Thanos. It would feel too much of a copy of that. So I do like that they kind of changed up, but then they added like the motions and stuff of his wife. Really cool. Really cool. I love this movie. I love Awkwafina in this movie. Now, I did think that when she was shooting the arrows and stuff, that was a little over the top. I don't like that, but I love how they brought back the actor from Iron Man 3, who was the actor playing the Mandarin. I love how they brought that back. They brought that in, and kind of canonically, it made Iron Man 3 better for me. Love that so much. Okay, next up in this line of shows and movies, we have the Eternals. The Eternals is a storyline. Well, let's say this. In the DC universe, the New Gods and stuff is okay. I do like that. But in the Marvel universe, I don't really like their space stuff. As the guy who's all about sci-fi, I don't like the Guardians of the Galaxy. I think they're lame characters. And I don't like the Eternals. The only Eternal that I really have any appreciation for is Thanos. And I actually don't really care for his comic book version of Thanos. I much more prefer how they did him in the MCU. I didn't think I was going to like Eternals. I also saw that it seemed like all they were talking about was how diverse the cast was, and talking about there being a sex scene, which was played up more than it was, although I don't feel like we needed it in there. This movie wasn't bad. It wasn't great. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't groundbreaking like any of the things people like they were saying, but it wasn't bad. And the diversity, while definitely there, I feel like if they didn't make it the point of the marketing, it wasn't over in your face. Like, yes, all the Eternals are of all these different races, but at no point did one of them go, well, I've had to live all these 1,000 years as a black man, and you don't understand my pain. I've had to live all these years as in Bollywood, or like, they were just their characters. They were cool, and they weren't going, I'm this represent. No, there was none of that. There was a point where they showed that one of them was gay, and it wasn't like some big announcement, let's all clap because we have this. The storyline, the conflict, like, it was all good, but it just doesn't fit next to Iron Man. Like, it just doesn't. Even after Thanos and all that stuff, the Eternal storyline just feels like its own universe. It does not feel, even though they keep trying to make references to the MCU, it doesn't feel like it's in the MCU. And that's my issue with it. It was an okay movie. It wasn't a great movie. It did nothing special. It was, if anything, it was like a space comedy. Like, let's do an action movie, but like, kind of add a lot of comedy to it. But it doesn't feel like it belongs in the MCU. So it probably ranked low for me, but it in no way offended me. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything special. I don't care to see where these characters go. I don't, like when they did the teasers at the end, I just didn't care. Next up, more positive, Hawkeye. Hawkeye was brilliant. I loved Kate Bishop. I loved Echo. I loved Kingpin. Spoilers. Yes, Kingpin comes back, and he's not dead. Quit thinking that. That's how it happens in the comic. He gets shot in the eye, and he lives, and he's fine, and he makes a full recovery. Because he's the Kingpin. This was great. Amazing. This is like one of the best car chase scenes I've ever seen in a movie. Love this movie. Or this show. What I loved most about it was Hawkeye is my favorite Avenger. Because Hawkeye is a regular guy. He's got a lot of skill, but he's a regular guy. And when he's like duct taping cold frozen daiquiri patches to him and sitting in a chair at the end of the day, when she asks him how he got hard of hearing and why he needs hearing aids, and he's like, I don't know, it just happened and then they go through and they show all the explosions he's around, like all the shock waves and explosions stuff and loud noises he's experienced in time. And yeah, he's deaf. He's got hearing aids, special like Stark hearing aids that allow him to hear, but without him in, he's deaf. His body has taken a beating from being an Avenger. He's messed up. but he's super skilled. And I think they were able to take something like, one of the things that in comics is a common thing, because comics are made for kids. And so they all have like these child sidekicks, the Robin, so to speak. And it's always been one of these things where it's like, okay, well, that's a little weird. Billionaire Batman is going out and fighting crime. Okay, but, and then he starts taking a 12-year-old with him to do it. That's not at all mentally right. I see why people have problems with it. I have always, since being a young kid, been a huge Robin fan, identified with Robin, wanting to be Robin. I didn't want to be Batman. I wanted to be Robin. That's who I thought was cool as a kid. As an adult, I can look at that situation and go, like, that is messed up. The way they put around why Hawkeye is involving Kate Bishop, who's a bit older, even though she looks like she could be 16, they're portraying her as she's practically an adult now, but just newly adult, the 18 to 20 range or something like that. And they show her, and it's really good the way they do it. And I like the relationship that they build, and through the whole thing, and you find out her mom actually works for the bad guys, but they establish why she's trained to be a great archer. She was there, the battle in New York, seeing it from her perspective as everything's happening, and the arrow that saves her from Hawkeye as she's about to be murdered by one of those aliens. And Hawkeye has he's just in the battle, but to her, he's the hero. Iron Man's going up there blowing, she don't care about that. She would have been dead if it weren't for Hawkeye, this ordinary human being who's out there fighting alongside the Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, all this stuff, Thor, and he's out there working right alongside him, and that impressed her. And yeah, the LARPing was a little funny, but it gave them an opportunity to bring all of these in a Hawkeye comic. Hawkeye is the normal guy thing. Now, comic book Hawkeye, he can do 300 arrows a minute. He's ludicrous. But, his super villains, so to speak, of course, have to be even more crazy than him. So this is, like in DC, we have Condiment King and Boomerang Man. That's kind of like what, there's the Swordsman and stuff. Those are Hawkeye villains. Echo, this, and so we're getting a bunch of them were displayed in the LARPers. So I thought that was funny how they brought that in. So now going on to the big one, Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie is amazing. Now, it not only makes every Spider-Man movie reactively better in some ways, although I will come back to that, but Andrew Garfield, I think, is an amazing Spider-Man that had some non-amazing movies because of the writing. And I would love that if Sony went back and put him in the Sonyverse and we got some Andrew Garfield movies, or have him as a cameo in some of their villain movies. So it's not, their villains aren't in the MCU proper, they're in the MCU multiverse. And so they can do whatever they want with, but they want to have a Spider-Man fighting their Spider-Man villains, have Andrew Garfield co-star in those movies. Or be end credit scenes or whatever. I think that'd be cool. Tobey Maguire. Spider-Man 2 is my favorite Spider-Man movie. It is famously, I thought it was such a romantic movie that when I was dating my wife, I told her, you have to watch this one, and if you don't like it, I won't make you watch any more superhero movies with me. She didn't like it. Still married her. I love her. And she loves Superman. She watched Superman and Lois, Smallville, all that. She will watch that with me anytime, anywhere. She likes the love story of that, which is why I thought she would like this. Spider-Man's just a little bit too weird for her. The spandex crawling on the wall is not her thing. The upside down kiss was not an amazing thing for her. That said, Tobey Maguire, in my opinion, is not a good actor. He's kind of creepy. His Peter Parker is creepy. And that was like super apparent in this movie. Like compared to the other two Spider-Man, seeing them side by side, like, yeah, I don't like this guy. I may have loved his movies, but I just don't like him as an actor as much. So in that way I didn't improve it. But I do love how like they had the issue of like he's killing off his villains. That was, I hate when Batman and Spider-Man movies do that, where they have these famous villains and they're killing them off in one movie. Why? That's not how these heroes operate. So having them go back and fix that, having them go back and Elektra being done right, all this movie is just so good, and it's really good for building Tom Holland. He has Aunt May die, and that's his Uncle Ben moment, and the others talk to him about Uncle Ben, and so he never had Uncle Ben tell him great, like he died before he became Spider-Man. So that's why it's not a pivotal part of him being Spider-Man. He didn't have that moment. But that lesson was something that he had told Aunt May, and Aunt May told it to him on the death, giving him his own version of that, spewing him into the proper Spider-Man we're going to see in the next. And the way that he erases it, I just love how this all worked out. This just worked out so well that in the end I was like, this is a good movie. This is a great movie. However, for whatever reason, it hit all the nostalgia berries, but it was not a movie. It just doesn't hit as high for me. I definitely like Shang-Chi better. And that's not something that I would think I would say for all of the nostalgia fills for it. For whatever reason, I like Shang-Chi better. It is not without its flaws. I think that the nostalgia is overriding the flaws of this movie. And because of that, I think that it will not age as gracefully. I might even like Far From Home a little better. But right now, I can't say that. Like, it's just so hyped. So much happened in this movie, and they did so much right. So much fan service. I love it. I love it. But it just, I don't know. It just, I did not walk out of it feeling like Infinity War. I walked out of it almost like Endgame. And if I haven't talked about Endgame before, Endgame is an amazing movie. Infinity War is a 3-hour movie that feels like it's 1 hour. And it ends, and you go, I want to watch Endgame now. I want to continue it. You get halfway through Endgame, and you're like, how much is left of this? It's a good movie. It has powerful moments, but it feels long and drawn out. This Spider-Man movie just kind of felt a little long, a little drawn out. But the hype moments are some of the most hype moments in the MCU. Topping, I would say, Spider-Man walking through the portal tops Captain America with a hammer. Yes, that hype. But the movie overall, I don't feel like it'll have as much rewatchability. I don't think I'll be watching this yearly. I watch Infinity War every year. I don't watch Endgame every year. But there are moments of Endgame that are some of my top moments in the MCU. So, that's how that goes. Now, with what we have coming up, at the end we got the trailer for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. This is tying into WandaVision, tying into this, tying into Loki. Boom. I really like where they're going with the MCU. It feels like they're going to a whole lot of different ways. We see the Patrick Stewart appear, so we're going to have the X-Men movies. I love that they're connecting. All of these are part of the multiverse. The fact that they can do that they can retcon anything at any moment now with that kind of stuff, is great. They can take the original Hulk movie and say, well, that was actually in another multiverse, but similar events happened in ours. If they wanted to, they can do that. They can do all this stuff. They left it really far open. As much as I didn't care for the first Doctor Strange movie, but I really loved him in Infinity War and Endgame. I really liked what I saw here in the trailer. I really am intrigued by this. I liked what I saw of him in What If. This is looking good. The other thing we have right around the corner is Moon Knight. Moon Knight is a character that I know nothing about. I know he is comparable. A lot of people compare him to Batman, but he is not Batman at all. Like, yes, he prowls the night. He's kind of a cape vet, and he's fighting that, but he's all sorts of weird power derived from here type multi-personalities, but he's very different. But aesthetically, he looks like Batman. The way he fights bad guys is similar to Batman, and so that's why you get that kind of Batman vibe from him. But that trailer for Moon Knight, super hype. Now, I'm not going to talk about anything in the past, but those two things coming up, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited with where the stance of the MCU is. Now, if I had to rank these, okay, we're going to go number 1, WandaVision. Yes, my number 1 movie of all this is WandaVision. Number 2, Shang-Chi. That's my number 2 in all of this. Number 3 is Spider-Man No Way Home. Number 4 would be Hawkeye. Number 5 would be, number 6, I'm sorry. Number 6 would be Spider-Man Far From Home. Oh, let's look. We did Hawkeye, we did that. Then I'd probably have to go Black Widow. Then What If? This is where it gets hard. I'm probably going to go Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and then Eternals. Eternals last. Like I said, didn't hate Eternals. It and Falcon and the Winter Soldier are kind of right there in part. A little bit Loki too. Like those three kind of sit there at the bottom. But my top ones are definitely going to be WandaVision. And if I were just ranking on the movies, like what breaks in my top 10, I'm gonna say that Shang-Chi breaks into my top 5 and Spider-Man No Way Home breaks into my top 10. If we were to put the shows in it, of course, then WandaVision would also would boot maybe Shang-Chi out of my top 5 and put WandaVision there. I haven't really ranked them with the shows, but yeah. So loving MCU Phase 4 so far. Looking forward to where they go next. So with that, I will catch you all in the next video.